Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Welcome to the deep dive. It's certainly been a week with a lot happening.
It really has. So much to unpack.
Yeah, today we're going to try and peel back the layers on what's, well, a really complex situation. It feels like every development shifts the ground underneath us.
Absolutely. Our aim today is to connect those dots, from the high-level talks right down to the changes happening on the front lines.
And see what it all might actually mean.
Exactly. Give you a clearer picture of the state of play.
Okay, let's start with that phone call. U.S. President Trump and Russian President Putin. It happened sooner than people thought, didn't it?
It did. Before the planned Zelensky call, and definitely ahead of the July 4th timing some expected.
And the immediate takeaway seems to be, it wasn't exactly a friendly chat.
Not at all, based on what's public. U.S. President Trump expressed, disappointment, said Russian President Putin just doesn't want to end the war.
He proposed a truce, I heard.
He did. But Russian President Putin apparently doubled down, said he wouldn't abandon his objectives. There's even this interesting sideline that maybe Russian President Putin questioned a potential U.S. strike on Iran.
Oh, that often gets under U.S. President Trump's skin, doesn't it?
It tends to. So, yeah, it sounds like quite a tense exchange.
But here's the odd thing. Despite that friction, between U.S. President Trump and Russian President Putin, Kyiv isn't exactly celebrating.
Right. You'd think any disagreement would be seen as positive there. Usually, any hint of tension gets people in Kyiv quite excited.
There was hope, maybe, that this would, unlock the U.S. arms supplies again, the ones paused on July 1st.
That was the hope. But U.S. President Trump's been quite clear, hasn't he? Saying aid was too free-flowing before, and the U.S. needs to look after its own stockpiles now.
And there's that Pentagon audit happening, too.
Exactly. So if large shipments suddenly resumed, it might look, inconsistent with those statements. It creates a bit of a political knot.
And the Russians see this pause
as an opportunity. Any break in air defense supplies. The Russian Ministry of Defense sees that as a green light to ramp up attacks. They exploit any perceived weakness.
And we saw that almost immediately. After the call reports, the sirens went off.
Yes. A huge wave of attacks. Kyiv hit by dozens of drones, over 500 air targets reported across the country.
Just devastating numbers. More than 24 wounded, buildings hit. Even the Polish consulate.
It was widespread. And then the very next morning, something new happened in Kyiv.
What was that?
First time hit by an aerial bomb. A Drom-1, one of those new glide bombs.
Wow. Big impact.
Apparently the smoke plume was huge, almost like in Kyiv. And it highlights a vulnerability weak air defenses let the plane get close.
Because all the good systems are protecting the capital?
Seems that way, protecting the presidential office specifically. And Kyiv is a major hub, lots of resources. It's likely to become a much heavier target now.
Which means more civilian risk.
Tragically, yes. We also saw hits near TCC buildings, the recruitment centers in Kyiv and Poltava.
Resulting in casualties.
Yes. Wounded military personnel, but also nearby administration staff, even a recently demobilized soldier. These centers are definitely being targeted more often.
That's grim.
And what's also quite concerning internally is that some people are actually pleased when these TCCs get hit. There's a lot of animosity towards them.
Really? That points to a deeper issue.
It does. A real internal friction.
Okay. Shifting back to the diplomacy or lack thereof, U.S. President Trump keeps voicing disappointment with both sides.
Yeah, it seems to be his main public stance on the war. Almost like he feels they're both blocking his path to a Nobel Peace Prize.
But it's his actions that matter, right? What are we actually seeing?
Well, that's the key. We're seeing sanctions developed by some parts of the U.S. government being slowed down. Some are even being lifted.
Lifted, such as?
Things related to Syria, surprisingly. And some Russian financial institutions suddenly seem to be getting, rehabilitated.
So the trend is less pressure.
Definitely looks like a reluctance to impose new sanctions, and even an effort to ease existing ones. Some on his team are reportedly even talking about scrapping sanctions altogether. It was quite a shift.
So with the U.S. easing off, Zelensky must be feeling the pressure.
It certainly looks like it. You could see this as a kind of strategic squeeze play.
How so?
Well, U.S. President Trump paints Russian President Putin as the aggressor who won't stop. Then the argument becomes, we don't have the weapons to help because we need them ourselves.
So it justifies holding back aid.
Exactly. And the implied message to Zelensky is, Since Russian President Putin won't budge and we can't help, maybe you should make concessions.
All the public statements just fit into that narrative.
That's how it could be interpreted. And Russian President Putin, seeing the battlefield situation and maybe U.S. President Trump's disposition, might just be playing along, taking advantage.
Which brings us back to the battlefield. Zaporizhia Oblast, Kamyansky Russians breaching defenses.
Yes, they've crossed the Anchi-Krak River there. That's significant.
Why specifically?
It lets them push towards high ground overlooking Stepnohursk. And Stepnohursk is near a key road to the city of Zaporizhia. So it threatens that supply line.
And this happened because forces were moved.
It seems the redeployment of Ukrainian forces from the south up to Sumy weakened the Kamyansky line, and eastwards too, Stepo, Shabaki, they're stretched.
And fighting elsewhere.
Still ongoing in Malanivka. But a big hit was on another Hulai pole, the one in Dnipropetrovsk region. A missile strike took out the command of the 110th Brigade.
Killed the commander.
Commander Serhiy Zakharich and several other officers. A major blow to their leadership, basically decapitating the brigade.
Though there was a significant Russian loss, too, right, in Kursk.
Yes, Major General Gudkov, Deputy Commander of the Navy, formerly led the 155th Marines. A big name.
Okay, back to the southern front. Veluka Novosilka area.
More Russian gains there. Zlinpol, Novopol captured. Shevchenkov lost. They're pushing towards Malivka and Voskresenka.
From two directions on Voskresenka.
Yes. After taking Podubny. To get Podubny, they had to cross the Mokry-Yaly River, establish a foothold on the western bank. Even Ukrainian monitors admit that.
So they're making steady progress.
Yes, and from Podubny, they're also attacking Tolstoy. It looked like a coordinated push.
Does this mean the whole southern part of Donetsk Oblast below Pokrovsk is close to falling?
That's the projection, yeah. And since the border, there isn't all natural barriers like rivers, they probably won't just stop at the Oblast line.
Places like Zerka, Yalta, abandoned?
Largely, yes. Seems like a strategic withdrawal in some areas. Then there's Dakhne and Dnipropetrovsk. Conflicting reports there.
Russians claim it's liberated.
They put out footage. Ukrainians deny it. It's likely at least a contested gray zone. And crucially, a road runs from Dakhne straight to Novopavlivka, which was a key hub until recently.
So controlling Dakhne matters.
Absolutely.
North of Selidov, though, the front isn't quite aligned with the Donetsk border yet.
Not quite. Moravika seems to still be Ukrainian-held. But Russians have had success nearby in Novomykolaiivka and Novosibirsk.
And are attacking Dakhne's rear from there.
Reportedly, yes. Putting more pressure on that contested village.
What about Pokrovsk itself? You said activity paused.
The direct push seems paused. They tried bypassing west before. Now movement is coming from the east. Last week, they consolidated in Mern and Koptev.
And are attacking elsewhere nearby.
Assaulting the Novoekonomikne, claimed Razin, started fighting for Fedorivka. It looks like they're pushing towards transport links beyond Ryunorad.
Like Shakhov, Nekonorivka.
Yes, and Dorozhny. The goal seems to be cutting off Myrnorod and Pokrovsk from their northern supply lines, from Sloviansk-Kramatorsk.
Isolating them.
Exactly. And we saw what happened with Vuhledar when it was encircled. That was much smaller. The consequences here could be severe.
Kostiantynivka direction seems quieter.
Relatively. Some minor front adjustments near Sherbanivka, and north of Toretsk, they took two villages called Dilivka, pushing towards Bilohora. But not huge shifts reported. But then there's Shasivyar, Russians claiming a turning point.
What are they claiming?
First, control of a residential microdistrict, Shevchenko. Then the village of Nikolaevka next to it. And just as we were gathering this, the Russian Mahdi claimed Predtashin.
But Ukraine hasn't even confirmed losing Stupatsky before that.
No. That kind of gap often means things are moving fast, and not in Ukraine's favor.
So if defenses are collapsing there, why? What are the main reasons?
Probably two big things. One, pulling those vital combat-ready units away to Sumy creates gaps.
And the second?
They're getting very close to Kostiantynivka, basically completing its capture. Kostiantynivka sits high up. Once they control it, all the exit routes will be under constant fire. It's strategically critical.
Okay. What about Seversk and Lyman directions?
Seversk, no major breakthroughs, but attempts to secure Serebryanka. Lyman, they lost some ground in Ridkadub, now facing counterattacks. Fighting seems to have started again near Kuliakivka. They're pushing south to Bohuslavka, north to Lushkivka. Slow grinding.
And up north, Kharkiv Oblast.
Ukrainian sources confirm Russian movement near Sinkivka. But maybe more worrying is they took Melov, crossing the border in a different spot.
What's the risk there?
If they push from Melody, it could cut the logistics link between Veliki Burluk and Vovchansk. And pressure on Volchansk itself has really ramped up this month.
In Sumy, still focused around that Kondrativka to Sadki line.
Pretty much. Ukraine couldn't really build on liberating Andriivka. Russians haven't fully taken Unikivka either, despite claims. It's just a constant simmering fight there.
So the big question is reserves.
Exactly. Who has more? And will plugging a hole in Sumy cause a collapse somewhere else, like maybe near Kursk or Tiakhino on the Russian side?
And Russians are counterattacking near the border there, too.
Yes, General Syrskyi had said they were constrained, but they've hit back recently, claimed a stronghold, potentially creating another buffer zone inside Ukraine. It's incredibly fluid.
And hanging over all of this is the uncertainty about U.S. weapons. That feels like the biggest unknown right now.
It really is. And add this to the mix. North Korea is apparently expected to send up to 30,000 soldiers to help Russia.
30,000? That's triple the previous number.
Huge number. Could be used to guard Russia's own borders, freeing up their troops. But it's not clear they have to stay in Russia.
What if they fight in Ukraine?
Big questions about sanctions then, for sure. And you just don't see South Korea sending 30,000 troops the other way, do you? It highlights a potential imbalance in support.
So whatever the narratives, the feeling on the ground, especially in Kyiv, must be pretty bleak.
There's definitely a sense you hear from Kyiv offices that an end is coming. Not the end of Ukraine, but perhaps the end for the current leadership.
Why?
Just an accumulation, a feeling that mistakes, both political and military, have piled up and led to this really difficult situation on the front lines. It's a noticeable shift in mood.
It's just so complex. Every move, diplomatic or military, seems to ripple out and affect everything else.
It really shows how interconnected it all is. The narrative, the reality on the ground, they're constantly shaping each other.
Hopefully we've helped untangle some of those threads today.
That was the goal, to see beyond the individual headlines and understand the bigger picture that's unfolding.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.